how about we go ahead and call this one to order. Appreciate everyone being able to make time for this. I realize for council it's 2 nights in a row, for commission is having to put up with council, and so appreciate everyone being willing to do so. This is the culmination of about a year's worth of work, and I know we're going to get into the timeline. You got a fantastic graphic that I think is very helpful to at least handhold my memory and get me back focused on what it is that we've been working on and what it is that we're ultimately hoping to be able to approve in June and July between the commission and the council. So with that, we will move into a roll call. We'll need to do this in 2 separate roll calls. I will begin by asking our deputy clerk to do one for council, and then I'll ask our staff liaison for planning commission, Ms. Jones, to do one for planning commission. As other folks are able to trickle in, of course, just remind to add them to the list if they're not here. So, Madam Deputy Clerk, if you would, please.
Yes, sir. Mayor Gaylor.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Weeks.
Present.
Councilman Boyette.
Present.
Councilwoman Taylor.
Present.
Councilman White.
Present.
Mr. Rose.
Present.
Mr. Barr.
Here. All right. So this can count, and I'll rely on staff to correct me where I'm messing up. We can continue. We do have a quorum for council, and so we proceed there, and of course then you'll have minutes to be able to add to things. If you would, there we go. We have 2 more members that are able to come in. Here. Guess what? Oh, okay. There we go. There you go. All right, perfect. So roll call being completed. The logic was trying to put council members and then the representative on planning commission that was from that section of city council with them, so there could be some intermixing and be able to opportunity for conversation, especially once we get down to 4.3, the actual discussion period. So we've done our call to order, we've done our roll call, y'all have updated the roster of those who are present. An adoption of the agenda would be the next item. The way that I think the right procedure for this is it's a joint session. The only actual motion to be made this evening would be a motion to adopt the agenda and then a motion to adjourn. I believe that anyone present would be able to make that motion. It would not have to be limited to someone from council, right?
It's a joint meeting, so that it could be anybody.
All right, perfect. I just wanted to get that on the record as well. So with that, I would entertain a motion from anyone present to be able to adopt the agenda as presented or modify the agenda as presented.
So moved.
All right, do I have a second? All right, motion's been made and properly seconded to adopt the agenda as the business order of the day. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote by show of hands, and I'll ask council to vote by show of hands first. And then we'll ask planning commission members to vote by show of hands now. There we go. That way Ms. Jones can get an accurate count. Perfect. All right.
Probably should have gone against it.
Just out of principle? Well, fair enough. That being said, motion passes on unanimous votes. All right, so next we will move to the actual substantive part of this. There are 3 items in front of us. One is the actual presentation of the memo to kind of get everyone level set on what it is that we're here for, and then the actual plan presentation itself. And then item 4.3, of course, to leave ample time for discussion and any questions, comments, things like that. So with that, Mr. Livingston, I'm going to stop talking and hand it over to you. And again, appreciate everyone's time tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to really go into a lot of detail. I'll just hand it over to April Choice, our Development Services Director, to kind of kick it off for us.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, and Chair Rose, and remaining council members and planning commission members. Welcome today, and today's meeting is to introduce to you the draft Elevate Goldsboro Comprehensive Plan. So the purpose of this meeting is for you to review the plan, the presentation by the consultants, provide any comments and questions and suggestions, things of that sort, prior to adopting Elevate Goldsboro. So today I will provide you just a kind of a brief overview and history of what has happened until now. The last comprehensive plan was completed in May of 2013. It was called Envision 35. So typically about 10 years later, we work on a new comprehensive plan. And so around the end of December 2020, or end of 2024, early 2025, we contracted with Kimley Horn for a comprehensive plan update. And again, just to review, a comprehensive plan is a roadmap for how we develop our community. And so during this time, we engage stakeholders, we engage community leaders, staff, and we get comments on, what our community should look like in the future. Around from May to August of 2025, we kicked off Elevate Goldsboro with Kimley Horn. They began to engage the community, engage staff, engage stakeholders to learn more about our community. They developed a community characteristics document, and we began to formulate committees and plan workshops. Phase 2 of our work with Kimley Horn was getting into the meat of the document. So at this point, we learned about what are our priorities, what do we see and envision happening, and what does growth look like, and what are those strategies. So they worked very well with us in workshops. We had workshops here at City Hall, and we also had workshops within the community. And of course, now we're at phase 3. They gathered all of our thoughts, all of our opinions, and we didn't always mesh well, so they did a pretty good job putting all of our comments and individual thoughts and visions about the community into a document to adopt. So I will hand this over to Kimley Horn. They will provide a more detailed assessment of our time frame, the work that was done, and then the results of our draft plan. Thank you.
Hey everyone, good to be with you all tonight. So I am Jonathan Whitehurst, and I am with Kimley Horn. I want to start by saying, we've reached kind of the end of this process, and you heard kind of April talk about that journey. It's a little bit bittersweet as a consultant, right? Because I was just mentioning to Mark, it's a very familiar ride at this point into Goldsboro. And I will say that every one of these plans, and we've done dozens of these over the last decade or so, we always naturally know more now than we knew at the beginning of the process. And I always say, man, if only I knew then what I knew now. And so that's just a natural reflection of this process. So I want to just start, we'll come back to that. We've created this draft report, and what the whole point of tonight is to make you all feel comfortable as we enter into kind of the more formal adoption process. And so what we thought we would do is we would organize our presentation around the organization of the report itself. And so you can see there, we've got 6 sections or 5 sections. So we'll start kind of giving you an overview with the information that's presented in the introduction, and just kind of walk you through the document section by section. And so this first piece, the introduction, really outlines the planning process. It talks a little bit about the strategy that we used for community engagement, and kind of talks about the overall purpose of Elevate Goldsboro as a guiding document, a document that needs to be kind of revisited as things change. And so when we think about what is a comprehensive plan, you've heard already kind of talking about how the community came together to participate in this process. And so the point of taking all of those conversations, all of those clicks on the website, and distilling that into a community vision for the city. Then we go through the process of outlining a land use strategy based on the vision, and then wrapping the land use strategy with a series of policies and actions so that it has a little bit more teeth to it than you would find with just a static map. That last point is really important. This truly is a living document. As April mentioned, this is an update to a plan that was done in 2013. I would think that you would probably want to revisit this more sooner than 12 years from now, and I think the state would appreciate that as well. But I think how this plan differs from that other plan is I think there's a little bit more intentionality to the actions that are set forth. And so those actions, and we'll talk about that at the end of the presentation, really provides kind of a litmus test as to how the city is going about adopting or updating or achieving the plan itself. So here's the graphic that kind of April kind of talked through. We did start back in May, kind of kicking it off, did a tour of the city. It's great to have members of our advisory committee represented today. We met with them a total of 4 times. And that was just kind of our kind of entryway into the larger conversations that we had with the community. You can see that we had a couple of workshops, some online engagement as well. If you recall, I was in front of you all back in the November timeframe as well. But that all leads us to kind of where we are there. You can see in the orange, we're at the very end of this process. So it was hinted that we did do a community characteristics report. That was kind of our first major deliverable where we kind of summarized the existing and projected conditions for the city of Goldsboro and the overall study area. That information was just pulled from that early deliverable and dropped into the report with some minor edits to kind of the formatting itself. But we want to kind of intentionally start out this particular document with an overview of kind of where things stand now and where they would be in the future. It's important to note that the study area itself is a little bit different than what your Envision 35 plan was, in that we kind of zeroed in a little bit more to the city and the surrounding areas, whereas Envision 35 looked at the entirety of the county. So that allowed us to focus a little bit more intention on kind of the city itself and those areas that are likely to be influenced by growth and development in the future. So the community characteristics itself is organized around a variety of topics. It touches on the city's role in the region. I think if you think back to the conversations that you've had very recently with your Parks and Recreation Master Plan, as part of that process, it was very clear kind of the weight that the city carries, not just in the county, but in the region as a whole. And that's true from a housing standpoint or a jobs. Basically, everything that this plan touched shows that the city is kind of at the heart of the larger region. We talked about, in this particular section of the report, the development patterns, the population trends. We touch on connectivity and transportation, housing, and kind of what comes with that, as well as the various community assets, the community kind of touch points that we have here in the city. Section 3 gets into our vision, and so this is where we start to define kind of what we heard from the community and what we understood from that review of existing conditions. I think this slide is incredibly important, so I want to kind of slow down here just a little bit. When you think about all of the meetings that have occurred, all of the online engagement, that wasn't just for show. Every time somebody came to a meeting or clicked a button on a website, we captured that data, we captured those comments, and we kept track of it. And so over the course of this last year or so, we've had 650 touch points, and those have generated more than 5,000 individual data points that we've been able to kind of use in this overall process. We neared 1,000 written comments, which is great. That's a lot of comments for us to kind of go through and make sense of, but that's exactly what we wanted out of this process. But that last number is really important. 560 plus community hours were invested in this process. And so it empowers me to stand in front of you all and talk about this being a community-driven plan, but the numbers support that there is data to support that this is a community-driven plan. The website, 1,700 hits, and over 1,200 people, individual unique users, have participated online as well. The way that that information gets kind of communicated in the report is through these engagement spotlights. And so instead of just having one section in the report that we kind of go through a laundry list of saying this is the engagement that we did and this is what we heard, instead we, early in the report, we kind of introduce the strategy. But anytime that we're talking about a particular topic in the report, we'll talk about how we presented that information to the public and what we heard. So you'll see those engagement spotlights sprinkled throughout the overall document. If you were to take those hundreds and hundreds of data points or thousands of data points and a couple of thousand comments and tried to distill it into a couple of phrases, it's not necessarily easy to do. And I think I mentioned this when I was last in front of council, but there's a clear understanding that Goldsboro has untapped potential. And so it's not uncommon for us to do these types of plans in places where there's just a lack of excitement about the future. And so I think that it was refreshing for us to come to Goldsboro and for people to recognize that while the city and not every aspect is kind of fully capitalizing on that potential's there, and we've just got to figure out how to tap into it. I think there's also a clear crosswalk from kind of where the future might be for the city and kind of the history that is behind us. And so making sure that there's a clear crosswalk, that we're preparing for the future but not losing sight of kind of where we've been and where we are. And so that was kind of the overall touch points that we had to lead to this vision statement. So Elevate Goldsboro is our plan for a thriving community that creates lasting investment in our people, institutions, and places. With cooperative spirit, we will grow responsibly, fuel economic growth, and prepare for change as we build a resilient future that elevates us all. I would be doing a disservice to you all if I just put a vision statement out there and said, thanks, see you later, right? And so it's kind of intentionally broad, and so the whole point of the plan is to make sure that we're pointing toward that vision statement in every word that's in that document and every action that is recommended. In support of that vision statement, we have these 5 guiding principles. So those are engage, grow, move, prosper, and thrive. And so as you probably saw in the report, that's how that's kind of the organizing structure for a lot of the document that kind of comes after this. With that, I'm going to pause and let Ross introduce himself and kind of carry you through a couple of these sections.
How's it going? My name is Ross Whipkey. I work with Jonathan at Kimley Horn and have been involved in this process from the kickoff. As Jonathan's mentioned, we really focused on community engagement and letting the community drive this plan. And so the 4th section of this report really focuses on the plan, presenting the actions organized around those principles, the engage, grow, move, prosper, and thrive. And then looking into the future land use map, which is one of the major takeaways from this. I really like the graphic on this slide because it kind of shows where we started and where we're moving towards. So with that community characteristics report, we wanted to be intentional to focus on, what's currently represents Goldsboro, and then using the community, we created that vision, and then from that, a conceptual growth strategy. And then through our workshops and our steering committee meetings and conversations with stakeholders, we're able to create and then make changes to a future land use map to, define variations in different land uses and set the stage in the future for an update to the city's Unified Development Ordinance. So our future land use map, which is going to be on pages 45 and 46, that's going to look at a parcel level all of the elements of Goldsboro and boil it down into 14 unique place types. Whether that's rural residential out in the county areas to kind of capture what's currently there, or a downtown transition zone, which we heard in a lot of our engagement was, connecting all the great work that's been done around Center Street to expand it to kind of the surrounding areas. So the following pages after that organize it in these place types and highlight that we're not saying specifically what we want in the future in these places, but what types of uses would be appropriate. So for example, in a commercial corridor, as we line some of those major thoroughfares, we're looking at retail and restaurant and institutional uses and office space. So not trying to highlight exactly at a parcel level what's going to be there to helpfully buy in with the community and not dictate, as that's going to be more in the future UDO update. All of that led to our policy framework, which is organized around some of those guiding principles. So we have 20 strategies and 72 actions that we devised with the community to help us get there. So looking at engage, we're focusing on strengthening transparency, celebrating the history of Goldsboro, and building those meaningful connections across the community. When we look toward growth, we're looking at guiding how and where development should happen, supporting balanced growth while protecting valued assets. That's where you'll find a lot of that information about our future land use map and how we'll go from that on a paper map to what's going to be the land use in the future. Our Thrive looks at promoting strong neighborhoods, public safety, and maintaining that high quality of life that we heard a lot about in all of our engagement. When we look at Prosper, we're supporting that economic opportunities, job creations, and having long-term resiliency economically. And then finally, Move looks more in the connectivity, accessibility, transportation options, really focusing on people of different ages and different abilities. So that culminates into kind of our final section, which I'll pass it back to Jonathan, where we look at how we're going to act and put this all into motion.
So it's called Our Time to Act, and so those 72 different actions are kind of culminate in this last section. And when we say an action, we're talking about a few different things. We're talking about policy recommendations. We're talking about, in some cases, specific projects, program recommendations as well. And there's a few plans that are recommended to provide a deeper dive into particular subjects. And so the way that the strategy is organized, so for each of those different guiding principles and for each of the actions that are in there, we're telling you what type of action it is, again, plan, policy, program, or project. We're talking about the responsibilities of who should lead the charge for that particular effort. We get into the resources that generally would be required to implement that particular action, both time and in some cases cost. And then the other thing that's in there that you'll see with the kind of the target icon are the community priorities. And so all of these actions were presented at our last community workshop, and we asked the public to tell us which of those actions are most important to them. That didn't necessarily, and we were very honest with them in the time, like that didn't mean that they were going to automatically rise to the top of the implementation process. But kind of in the spirit of transparency and like with this entire engagement process, as we're capturing that data, we also want to make sure that we're showing people the influence of their participation. And so those community priorities in the action plan are a very visible way that we can say, you know, we heard you, you said that this is a priority, and I think that's a helpful cue to staff as they're working through the implementation process itself. The report concludes with kind of a brief page, if you will, about carrying the vision forward. You can see the key points there, making sure that the plan is visible and out front. Continue to reinforce this as a shared vision to make sure that we're using the plan as we're making day-to-day decisions that'll have lasting impact on the city and the surrounding area. Making sure that we're staying responsible, but we're being adaptive as new things come along. You know, I think I'll pause and say, like, the future land use map is our best recommendation at this point in time. But if a great opportunity comes before you all and it's not necessarily in keeping with the future land use map, I think it is healthy to have a dialogue about that particular opportunity. And the plan is such that you should be able to adapt and adjust so that you're making the best decisions for the city moving forward. One of the things that got me real excited, the very first conversation that I had with April, was talking about like her her vision for using this process to kind of create a long-lasting community conversation. And so that's where building long-term leadership and accountability kind of come into play. Hopefully this is the very beginning of many conversations that will occur about what's best for the future of Goldsboro. And so I'll stop here. I'll just mention that the hope is that we can get good information or good conversation with you all tonight so that Planning Commission feels comfortable recommending this plan for adoption at your meeting later this month. And then in July, we'll be back in front of City Council for adoption. The other thing that you see there is, I know you all have gone through an exhaustive annual budget process, but I commend you all for kind of going ahead and making the next step of putting some of this plan into action. And so like the Unified Development Ordinance and your Downtown Master Plan, I think are two examples where you can ride a little bit of the momentum that you have with this effort to really put some teeth on things that ultimately will matter greatly. With that, happy to answer any questions. You can step up too.
Quick question. When you were talking about the priority for the plan that you were listing, what the priorities were, is there anywhere in this plan where that sticks out to where it's a priority, where we could look that up and kind of see where we're at?
Yep, and so I think there's different ways to interpret like what a priority might be. Like is the priority the things that you should do first, right? And so if that's the type of priority that you're focused on, in the implementation matrix that starts on page 81, there's a time frame and it talks about the initiation. So that'll tell you like which of these actions should be done first. If your definition of what is a priority is what is the community told us is important to them, then you look over at the community priorities in that matrix and you can start to understand that sense of priority.
Okay, so that was done in the workshops, the priorities?
So we worked with staff in the advisory committee to come up with the actions themselves. And once we felt comfortable making those public, we presented those to the public.
Yeah, additionally, in the policy framework section, which is in section 4, page 78 is an example for one of the community priorities in each one. We're going to call out a little bit more information, talking about supporting actions and just giving more information as to why that was identified as a community priority and where to go next with that as well.
So drilling down, if I may, as a follow on here, so drilling down into an example like page 82 of the plan, like D 1.2 and 1.3 are things that have the little target area that are community priorities. Support infill development. Is it then left to us to figure out the how, or is that also included in here somewhere, or at least tidbits somewhere?
Right.
Yeah, so there's not a lot of specificity on some of these actions, but I would say that that's where you kind of following this up with the UDO so that you make sure that your land development ordinance is set up such that it can support that infill development. The downtown master plan, as an example, hopefully that would identify those specific opportunities as well.
So that touches on 1.2, which is to update, modernize, and simplify the city's land development regulations. That's the thing that, of course, we've already included in this year's budget to be able to go and pursue in some way. And then support infill development. I guess that would be other subject matter experts that we would kind of look at other modalities for doing that. Okay, I got you. Just making sure I'm reading the graph correctly.
Right.
All right. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, I was asking that question because as the board, we'll have to sit down and the EDO stuff is what's really in our plate. And just like to have a little roadmap on navigating that.
That's right. Yep. And I will say, like the way that the UDO should work is that it should pick up that future land use map and start to drill down in much more detail than what we provided. I think if we're just focused on kind of the topic of infill development, I think that's a great example where you want to make sure that the plan states the case for that, but allows it to be kind of interpreted on a case-by-case basis moving forward, so
Right.
that in that moment, you're making the best decision for the city.
That's exactly right, but, go ahead.
Mayor.
Yes, sir, please.
One question in reference to the slide on page 45, which is the existing land use classifications, and it breaks down by percentage and area and so forth. Just curious if there is a template or how those numbers in by percentage stacked up the city of Goldsboro versus other cities like us. Is that a thing? Meaning, okay, if we're 73% single family residential of our, it is all other towns 40% or 90%, or just curious how we trended.
That's a great question, and I don't know that off the top of my head. But I will say, like we've done this plan in Morganton most recently, and we did that same kind of calculation. I don't remember what the numbers are, but like we could provide that. I will say though that it wouldn't be surprising to me if those numbers are quite different. And I think that these percentages would even be a lot different if you think about the study area being well beyond the city limits in some cases. If you drill down to just the city, then those percentages will be quite different. The other thing that I think would make that comparison difficult is these place types were kind of customized to the city. So like you could pull up a plan for Hickory or just name another place, and they might not have a neighborhood mixed use classification. So
Okay.
in some ways you're going to be comparing apples to oranges. Can I turn around and ask you a question? in response?
Absolutely.
Like when you see those percentages, does something feel right, or does something go, oh no, like why is that number so high or so low?
Well, it's funny you say that. So I didn't really want to just come right out with that, because I'm trying to educate myself, because when we did this in 2013, and we've had this conversation before when I chaired the committee that done this, we were looking at a county-wide picture. Now we're just looking at the city, but the one thing that just immediately jumped out to me, because we all have our way of thinking with development and stuff, is that the residential number seemed way high. And when I say way high, maybe it's perfectly in line, but I mean, it jumped out to me that like the first thing I'm looking for is, okay, how much commercial space do we have? How much business space do we have? Because obviously that's what makes living affordable,
Right.
more so than the residential side. So,
Well, and I'll say, like, I'm trying to get back to the study area map, because I think that tells a lot of the story. I probably should have just told you what page to flip to in your document. That would have been a lot faster
Well,
and a better use of everyone's.
Are y'all kind of referring to page like 21 of the plan, or are you in a different part? I want to make sure that I'm following along.
He's on the one right now
No,
for what is.
he was referring to the
now.
percentages on page 45,
Okay.
where it shows the breakdown of
Existing,
those
this is the
place types for the future land use
Okay.
map. I assume that's what you were referring to.
yeah, Mayor, and it was just the very first block at 73.42%, or 44,000 acres of the city is designated as single-family residential.
That's surprising to me.
Well, I mean, I was like, that doesn't sound right, and I'm like, is it just me? That it's that high, because if we're trying to make, as I said, living in the city affordable, the more residential, the more commercial and business and so forth and jobs and that development, then the more affordable the residential is for the people that live here. So I was like, I just thought that was out of whack.
If you look here on the
Yeah.
future land use, I think what they've done is the neighborhood residential and then rural residential, and these two numbers are real close to that
Together.
And I think they're splitting it up into, that's the orange and then yellow.
Okay.
Yeah,
You
and
see what I'm kinda getting at right there?
Yeah, I apologize. We were talking about two different things. I was talking about future land use and you were talking about existing land
Right.
use.
Right.
And
I'm
so.
sorry I didn't clarify further, but yes,
Yeah,
existing is
yeah,
what
and
I'm.
so I think you bring up a good point in terms of how we're using the place types to make a distinction between different types of residential. I was trying to go back to the study area map because we're looking at areas well beyond, not well beyond, but definitely beyond the city limits itself. And so that's why you're picking up so much of the residential, because it's just the rural areas that are surrounding the city.
Okay. I feel a little better now.
Okay.
I mean, again, it's just.
We eventually got there, even though
Yeah,
we were
but-
looking at two different things.
Because now would be the time while the plan's being worked on, if we said, okay, well, we want to see that percentage change and, you know, a single-family residential or multifamily, whatever category, but in this case, single-family come down and commercial of some sort go up, then now's the time to be figuring that out with the land use plan long before we get to the UDO.
And I think as we look like with the existing on page 25, we're at that like 73%. When you look at the future land use map on page 45%, residential is gonna end up being slightly over 50%, but it does expand some of those mixed use areas and commercial corridors to pull in some extra percentage of that.
Okay.
One quick question. What's the difference between neighborhood residential and rural residential?
And
I mean, I don't know why we got two designations. I'm trying to figure out what's the difference.
Subdivision, maybe,
I mean, is the zoning gonna be different for each of these?
Yes.
Or,
Sorry, so that would be in the intent is to use the UDO process to make that clear distinction. I mean, where the guidance that the Elevate Goldsboro process is providing is showing that like the rural residential is pretty much all residential, whereas the neighborhood residential can be supportive of non-residential uses if it's in neighborhood scale. And so that's where I think even looking at those percentages, it can be a little bit misleading because we're not kind of saying like this is your commercial area, this is your residential area. We're saying like in some ways it makes sense to mix those.
my question like to you guys is this like with this rural residential, can that be changed in 10 years, less than 10 years? Something, let's say commercially is moving and it's moving into that residential area and it's not developed, can we change it?
well, if I may,
we-
I asked that question of the manager before the meeting started. It was something that had come to mind to me, that is how along the process, if we see that
Right.
there's something that needs to be changed before the next update, however long that is, and we see a trend, that we can
Won't be
adapt
able to move and adapt,
and maneuver
right.
and make a change or an update to the plan, to bring, to keep the plan in line with whatever the vision and what happens growth-wise. If we see a
Right.
trend that we're okay with and we're like, we want this to continue, then we can update the plan to reflect our wishes as the
Exactly.
body.
Well, and there's like a specific action that says the city should revisit this plan. You don't have to do an update to the plan, but you need to kind of take it off the shelf and look at it,
Dust it
make sure
off
that it's going in the right direction. And I do think that it's correct, like if you need to make a change to your future land use map, then by all means do that. That doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to go through this entire process,
That was
and
the
it's gotta
question.
take 10 months or 12 months.
Right.
It could be, one meeting, you say, this doesn't make sense, this is why, let's vote on it, and let's make that change.
Say one thing that this guy's having an updated land use map is developers, there, especially the larger ones that are coming from places like Johnson County and Wake County, they're gonna start looking at this and they're gonna look at things like these regional mixed use. So those nodes that you put together right there, that's gonna show, that's gonna target where they're gonna put in the larger, millions and millions of dollars worth of property development in those areas. And that's what this is doing.
And it's imperative that we get this right.
Yeah.
I mean, at least in the right direction, because once the development's there, and then we're like, well, we probably should have done something different there. It's just too late. Particularly with
that's
this
exactly
scale
right.
of development as the way multifamily's being done.
You know, one of the fun activities that we did with the advisory committee is, we had a mapping activity, and they used dots to tell us, kind of where different types of growth should go. And so a lot of and we do that, like we walk through like in 5 or 10 year increments. And so suddenly we say it's 2045, there's this much growth that's occurring because downtown's been named a great place, you know. And I think what happens, and it may have happened here, but it certainly happened elsewhere, is somebody puts a dot on the map early in the process, and then they get 15 years down the road and they go, I wish that wasn't a residential dot, I think I'd like it to be commercial. And like, I think that's just a microism of this whole plan, right? Like you've got to think a little bit further into the future so that you're not making decisions today that kind of put your hands behind your back. 10,
I
15,
like
20
what you've
years.
done with the regional mixed use, because you applied a common sense approach with it, because those are the major transportation networks, and that's where, you know, you're gonna see a lot of investment go, because, and not just on population density here in Goldsboro, but the surrounding area, but also the traffic coming through there, you know, a lot of those commercial corridors. So I think that's really smart what you did there.
Okay.
Yeah, I was pleased to see the STIP factored in further, because again, transportation is gonna dictate.
What this is gonna be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This plan would be a lot different if the bypass wasn't there. So like, if you had done this plan 20 years ago, I mean, having the bypass there certainly is a driver for a lot of those decisions.
All right, and especially when you think about that bypass is sitting out there 20 years ahead of the time it was supposed to be there. I mean, when you think about the path, how it changed by that happening, you know,
Mhm.
how where we're at because of that.
That's right. Agree.
I'm gonna ask a question, and this may or may not be directly related, so if it's not, just kick the question out. On page 22, we're talking about occupancy status. Is there a reasonable ratio of owner-occupied, renter-occupied of what you hope to see, expect to see? Is there any sort of benchmarking there that we ought to be looking at?
That's a good question. It's so hard because like you being a military community like that you'd almost want to kind of figure out what your peer community is and focus in on there as opposed to like a national best practice or a national benchmark. I think a lot of times like what you would want to take into consideration is kind of the cost of housing regardless of if it's renter occupied or owner occupied. And you know what I mean? So like sometimes there's just a lot of variables
Yeah,
at play there.
but if you're trying to build a community, then you need wealth remaining in the community. You don't need it going to out-of-town landlords. And that's not a slight on an out-of-town landlord who's making an investment. I'm grateful for them. But you do have to acknowledge that monthly money leaving your community is different than monthly money investing in a thing that you own in your community.
Sure.
And so, again, absolutely don't mean anything by the question other than I was just curious if there is a benchmark or a point that we should be looking towards if we're trying to also address the reality that we've got, 24-26% poverty in our city. Again, just there's some things that are long time lingering issues that I don't know that it happens through this plan, but I'm just trying to see where things correlate and where they line up.
Yeah, I think I would be hard pressed to come up with
Okay.
like,
Sure.
what that percent would be.
Well, thank you.
Mayor, what page did you refer to?
That's on 22
Okay.
of the 100-page document. Yes, sir.
We focused enough on the areas that are going to get sewer,
Yeah, that's not.
sewer that's gonna be upgraded,
That's not my 22.
different, and how the areas, organized.
Yeah. That is a good point, and I think we started with trying to understand that as it relates to like what is the study area itself. We didn't get into a lot of detail though in terms of like the carrying capacity and potential utility extensions.
I will say some of those decisions between like rural residential versus neighborhood residential came down to like current and future like utilities capacity and fire and police capacity.
I'm gonna keep digging then. Talk to us about how you factor in flood hazard into your future planning. Because, I mean, call it a third of the city is in a 100 or 500 year floodplain, right? And so you've got building restrictions and pieces of those, you've got zoning restrictions and pieces of those. The value of that dirt, directly impacted because you can or cannot, what you can or cannot do on it. How do you plan around that? I mean, is there a way, a program that we participated in that did some good things was a FEMA buyout program that allowed, folks to buy out, to be able to sell out their land, and then that parcel of dirt then becomes the properties to maintain in perpetuity. That's wonderful. It allows that particular property owner an exit ramp. That's a wonderful thing. The downside is now the city owns it in perpetuity and is mowing the grass on it in perpetuity and is doing whatever with it in perpetuity, right? Or we could build on stilts. Like, how do you factor in floodplains into your building code to where that you don't basically have to write off a third of your city?
Well, I will say like the conservation place type, and you can speak to this, Ross, is kind of built around kind of those flood prone areas.
Yeah, I think if you combine kind of on the big document, pages 59 and 60, you'll see a lot of that, like the special district and the conservation exists either in like the military easement or within that conservation zone. And so that was kind of, we laid that as like the start of it. We also wanted to be cognizant of like existing uses that do exist within that floodplain. And so as we look to a future UDO update, paving the way to say like, we want to make sure we're protecting our assets and our wealth by developing responsibly and context sensitive within even, the noise zone surrounding the military base. So it factored into decisions. I think we did hear a lot about some of those buybacks within our community engagement process, and tried to be really cognizant of understanding even if a parcel's, a large parcel that's vacant on a major transportation corridor, maybe that's not a really good opportunity to develop because it is in that floodplain.
And there's certainly a little bit of kicking the can down the road for some of those decisions, because you want to put the regulatory pieces in the regulatory document, and that's your kind of upcoming UDO.
Fair enough.
Mr. Mayor, I think you hit on something really well. Like at the coast, Lord have mercy, if they couldn't build down there, they'd be out of business.
Yeah.
But they're building up. Exactly why can we not do that?
I think part of our,
What I'm saying is we could retrieve some of this land, rezone it, with elevation height like you were just saying, and, put houses on stilts just like at the coast, that kind of thing, and reutilizing this land.
Yeah,
and
you can do that
people
now.
having an opportunity, to.
I think that's a conversation that
I
you
don't know why we didn't do that to begin with, instead of buying these people's homes out, why we didn't just rebuild homes back like that for them. And then we wouldn't have ended up with the land.
Yeah, I would say I think that's something that you should have an honest conversation about as you're kind of going through any kind of the UDO process, to make sure that your regulations are structured such that if that's something that you want to make available in the future, that your regulations support it.
yeah, and I think as we looked at the future land use map, trying to remove barriers to development, such as, those codes that would require buildings on stilts was something we thought about a lot. So when we put our, regional mixed use where we did, that was designed to get people in places that are not only prime for development, but also there's going to be lower barriers for entry for this.
And this is what I think you and I what you were talking about earlier, about being able to, you know, things moving a certain way, and that's one of those type of things that could be moving a certain way, and could we change it?
Right, because it's a living, breathing document.
Right.
It's a living document, yep.
That's right. And one other thing I thought was interesting on page 43 with the occupancy status numbers, and I think the mayor touched on that a while ago. When I first looked at those percentages, I was like, gee whiz, that just doesn't seem right, given the difference between then and now, until you think about, well, that number is as of 2022.
Right.
And that's 4 years ago, and what's going on in the city in the last 24 months and what's going on in the next 36 months that we already know is coming out of the ground is going to alter that number significantly in the direction that I expected to see it to begin with.
Right.
Not that that's relevant to the whole dock, but I just thought that was there's been a dramatic leap in residential development in the last couple of years, whereas, you know, when this document was coming along the last time, there was a dramatic commercial growth, you know, and so now the trend is, I guess that's why I'm more tuned in, especially to this, because I think that the eye on the ball is the commercial piece first, and then the residential in behind that.
So I did want to address one issue, if I may. We do allow development in the floodplain. It has to be, I think, is it 2 feet or 1 foot above the base flood, 2 feet above the base flood elevation. We do have other properties that's part of the FEMA buyout and through the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency. Those were folks that decided that they would agree to sell their property, and in perpetuity, those lots do have to remain undeveloped. So we weren't really big fans, or I'll speak to myself on that. Not necessarily after we're seeing what would happen. It just scattered a lot of vacant lots here and there that weren't developable. So in that regard, I think it was kind of a flawed program for the city, so we're not participating in that anymore.
You know, down like on John Street, I think of Mina Will Park. Am I correct? John Street next door?
It's on Bunch Drive, there's one that's.
Well, there's some apartments on, I think
Yeah.
it's John. Is it John Street? Yeah, I believe it is.
It's John.
Yeah. But I mean, I know the people that own that land, they cannot get a permit to build more apartments on it because they said it's barely in the flood zone. I mean, it's just like a sliver, and they cannot get a permit to build on it.
Is that Roger?
So, I mean, that's what I'm saying is, why can't they get it? What would be I mean, I'd like to see the revenue coming in. That's what I'm saying, but why can't we overcome something like that?
Well, I think to their point, I think if we look at those ones that we can, and I think what we probably should do, and it wouldn't be hard for us to do, and I've asked this to happen already, so it may be in the works, is to designate those lots that are the Encore, the ones that we can't build on, that we have actually recorded deeds with them that make those that way, versus the ones that are just in the floodplain, which when we can look at our regulations to see if we need to go down to 1 foot above freeboard and things like that, whatever the wisdom of the time is. But the simple answer to your question is yes, and that's why we're redoing the Unified Development Ordinance, and we are issuing permits in the floodplain because I've seen them develop and they're building them up. So, but there are cases in there, as I've said before, and we don't think it's the best practice, is that, you know, to have gone along with some of these programs with Encore. It seemed, ideally, it seemed like a great way to help without getting development in constantly repeated flood-prone areas, but it created pockets of distributed openness, which made no sense in the grand scheme of things. If it was all in one area and then we were going to create open space for specific public purpose, it would be one thing, but it hasn't really worked very well for us here in the city. I don't think it's working anywhere, really.
It ended up being and again, I don't want to derail the conversation, because that is one specific program in the grand scheme of the history of Goldsboro, but, you know, that one, to your point, you would have a street and 3 people might decide to sell, and then the other folks are still sitting there going, well, I guess I just have a bigger side yard now. And so that one was a weird one. But again, I hope I didn't totally derail the conversation there. My point was simply, when you look at the floodplain, and I don't think the floodplain is going to get smaller over the next 50 years.
Right.
You know, pardon my pessimism on that. How do we ensure that we get our UDO right to where that we don't have to write off a third of the city? That's really all I was trying to get to. So it sounds like there's already conversations and pieces of the plan that exist to avoid that. Anyone other than me, I can keep kind of picking up, and then I want to ask about industrial property. So one of the points, and forgive me, I've been scrolling now, I've forgotten where I was. One of the points, I want to say it was, whatever the section was where it's gray and it's talking about industrial, one of the goals that had the little target dot on it was identify underutilized industrial sites, consider rezoning. And then when I look at the future land use plan, there's a couple of sites that I know used to be industrial that have not been industrial in a long time, and they're not zoned industrial anymore. So are y'all kind of looking at it from a standpoint of something that may have been a plant 20 years ago, let's look at redeveloping that site for residential or for commercial, whatever the heck it is, and then abandon that as an industrial site, or was it just missed?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you all want to kind of chime in on any of the specifics.
Yeah, so I think the thought process was, we've got a lot of these gray fields out there, right?
Yeah.
Underutilized property that has traditionally been used for industrial. And I think what we wanted to do was capture the vision of the community for these properties. And I think the consensus kind of was to direct new development or industrial development to our industrial parks and reimagine what these older properties would look like if they became, like, say, mixed use, or, you know, a mix of commercial and residential and the like. So
I can get behind that. Well, and there's also, again, not to derail the conversation, but there are sort of interesting industrial, light industrial, well, actually, one of them's heavy industrial uses that are in spots that you look at it now and go, why was that ever allowed in that spot?
Right.
And the ones that are there that are currently operating, I don't want to watch this meeting and go, oh crap, city council's about to come for you. It's not that. But it is at least acknowledging that if something were to change there, that probably would not be what it is right now. Is that a safe way of saying that?
I think that's pretty succinct, yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's fair.
Well, I think that Borden property would be an ideal example of a industrial property reimagined to what makes sense nowadays.
Yeah.
You talking about on William Street there? Yeah.
Because I think the mayor was probably referring or had in his mind the GE property as being one in that area too.
You've heard me rant about that one more than once, haven't you?
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's a
Yeah.
desire to see that something happen with it.
I was looking at this also on the future land use map where the industrial is.
Give us a page number, please, sir.
46
Okay.
and 46. I do know this, industrial is gonna be by interstate. They're not, you know, if you got 10 stoplights, they will never come. So up around 42, 795, that, if we get any industrial, that's where it's gonna be. And that's where they're gonna want to be. And, I don't see any industrial up there around the interstate at all. Am I thinking wrong or what?
You're not, so those are those regional mixed use designation. at those.
Is that regional mixed use industrial also?
I mean,
Or is that commercial and residential?
yeah, I think
Like
if you were
apartments
to
and
look at
stuff.
the regional mixed-use description on page 49, it does not encourage industrial.
Right.
Yep.
Cause it's like around Berkeley Boulevard down there, that's all regional mixed use.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying, why are we not gonna think about industrial up around the interstates?
I mean, I'll yield that to staff and,
I think it makes sense. Internally, we looked at that.
Mhm.
With WCDA, citing some things, so
Mm-hmm.
I think we can come back to them and have a little group setting with them, talk about if there's any, bring this back to them and see if there's any thoughts that they might have about something like that.
yeah.
There's some things in the irons in the fire that they're working on now, with some existing sites to expand those still are a priority.
Well, and I think in the context of this document, you have options would be, one option would be to show those as industrial areas. The other option would be in like the description or the intent of the regional mixed use place type is to suggest that in some locations, industrial uses might be appropriate, but in those locations, they need to be kind of buffered appropriately, or there needs to be some sort of design consideration so that there's
I get
an
that.
acknowledgement of the
Yeah.
surrounding area.
Right.
The other thing, like these regional, it's hard to get a sense of the scale of some of those regional mixed-use nodes at those at those interchanges. They're quite large.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think who weighs in on the recommendations for industrial is also, as Matt mentioned, the manager mentioned, with WCDA's input and because utility. I mean, if you say, well, that should be a prime industrial area because of the highway, but we know that for whatever reason it's impossible to provide a utility there, then that makes it irrelevant at that particular piece.
Oh, well, I get that, but if we don't get the infrastructure into something like that, we're gonna miss out, because that's where it's all
No,
gonna
I
go.
completely agree. That's
We got to do the infrastructure.
why I started the conversation that I did a while ago, because that's the direction that we need to be.
One of
Yeah,
the
that's
problems
right.
that we're having now, and I was involved in one recently, you had this perfect industrial property. And then the highway that comes along and decides to redo the highway, and you have to come out of there with a truck and go down and make a U-turn if you're going to Greenville, for instance. And it makes that very, very difficult to have those people use that property. I looked at it from every point of view I could, and I just couldn't convince them that it's a good location for industrial property.
And,
Right.
yeah, and that's why, like, in the description of the industrial, we talk about ingress and egress, like, specifically, because that is such a driver of the practicality or the value of those particular sites.
Yeah.
Well, council, as we're thinking about other questions, the timeline, there was a slide that was up at the very beginning. The goal would be able to, or the proposed timeline is that we would be voting to modify or adopt this plan after the planning commission reviews it later this month. And then any modifications or changes or whatever format it's in when it gets there, that it would be on our agenda in July. And so I realize this is the first time that any of us are seeing this in full package, but given that we only have one meeting in July, if you have questions, comments, concerns, do make some time to sit down with planning staff, with our manager, and let's try to get conversations out there. Obviously, I mean, we're not going to bull rush something through in July just because the calendar says it's July. But that was I think the proposal really. So time is certainly of the essence, but do take a look at it and see what questions and comments you have so that we can move forward.
Does staff feel like that's too aggressive of a timeframe to
Without
di-
making
to deep
amendments.
dive into
Making
some?
amendments.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just asking. It seems awfully aggressive
I just
to
wanted to
me.
ask one question in that, thinking about industrial property, because I do think that we should seek their input, but is that the pleasure of the council and the planning board to ask WCDA to give us their insights into, anything in this area where they're looking at potential industrial development? Is that something you want us to approach them about, or just?
Well, let's get a consensus of the room. We have the planning commission and council here. We now have a quorum for both, so you can get, official direction from both. Council, would you like it in the form of a motion, or would you like just general head nods to be able to get a consensus of the room to have some direction?
I'm okay personally with consensus, because I would like the WCDA to peruse the doc as well as county planning. And,
Sure.
and the county planning and their input, because there's people that know, things that's going on that some others may not, or whatever. I think the more eyes on it, the better, so far as the things that I've spoke to, and that seems to be
Yeah.
the priority topic, is commercial and industrial.
How about I phrase it this way, is there any objection to directing the manager to get the input of WCDA and county planning, specifically as it relates to industrial property along the interstate corridors? Right. Hearing no even head nods of suggestion, I think that's a direction.
Thank you.
So timeline, obviously, we're making no guarantees of July, but we would like to be able to get any feedback that we get from WCDA, from county, to be able to let planning commission hear that feedback. If any adjustments need to be made to the plan, be able to get revised versions, and then we'll be able to move on at the pleasure of council. Are there any other questions tonight? I don't want to hold people unnecessarily, but also don't want to rush out of here.
Trying to think. We must think about it for a day. I'm trying to put together a plan I'd like to see it all really wrapped up by September, October. And I think you could do that if you get some committees together where everybody's talking to everybody, the planning department and the council and everybody's talking and having a few meetings, and they bring those meetings together. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'd be interested in having some more conversation, absolutely, once the county and the WCDA has an opportunity
Say
to weigh
things like
in.
that.
I
Yeah,
would certainly
exactly.
be interested in hearing
Yep.
those thoughts. And if we did that in the form of official sit-down like this, is fine, or in
Or
however
have
it needs to
small
happen, or
groups, and
small
then-
groups.
And then we come together, have a leader of the group come together, of each group come together, and then put it together.
Council and Commissioners, Barry, what's Barry's last name?
Gray.
Barry Gray, planner for the county, was a participant. He was part of this planning process, and he was on the advisory committee. So
Okay,
there was
good.
some interaction with him.
Good.
So, yeah, that's kind of what we're talking about. This is the first we've heard of any of this.
We're just sort of, that's why I said maybe we were being aggressive a little bit with
Right.
time frame.
Yeah.
I don't mind slow walking a little bit to get it right.
Yeah.
And feel like I'm satisfied with the amount of input.
I think it's,
Well, you were on that committee, weren't you? Yes, okay, yeah.
well, it's also important to note that while I do want WCDA and the county specifically related to the industrial property, I don't want to omit the fact that we've already had small groups that have been working over the last year. We've already had folks from the county involved in the process over the last year. So my question to the group was if we wanted to direct the manager to go specifically with regard to industrial property along that interstate corridor. Because I don't want to go back and start over the whole process of getting small groups together and all those things. We've already done that. That was the whole point of the last year. So let's get that feedback of if they want to reconsider industrial pieces up there. Let's find out if any of that needs to happen. And if there are or not, then Planning Commission at its next meeting is going to be able to hear and be able to have future conversation. It may be necessary to invite some members of council to that meeting, or at the following council meeting to invite members of the Planning Commission to be there. I mean, we can always do that too. So
I think
we have options.
That's a good idea.
Okay. Is there anything else this evening? I think it's been a really good overview. Appreciate you guys' time. Again, not to rush out of here, but also not to hold us unnecessarily. Well, do we have a motion to adjourn? Motion's been made. Do I have a second? And I have a second right over here to adjourn. No debate on that. We'll vote by show of hands. Just everyone, if you would, all in favor of adjournment, raise your hand. That is unanimous for both sets of meetings. With that, thank you for everyone. Thank you, council. That's 2 nights in a row now. Thank you, commission, for being here this evening. We stand adjourned.